Poor cleaning lady saves rich man's son and changes her life forever. She gave a cold, shivering boy soup and shelter, then a wealthy white woman called the police and accused her of kidnapping. Why? Because Ruth Carter was black and kind. But that false accusation set off a chain reaction that would shatter one man's empire, expose a corporate lie, and ignite a wave of justice no one saw coming. Don't blink, because this quiet hero just might change how you see the world. On a cold, rain-soaked evening, Ruth Carter, a 67-year-old cleaning lady, was quietly finishing her late shift at a small diner. The neon lights flickered above her as she wiped down the last few tables, her thin hands moving with steady purpose. Life had never been kind to Ruth, widowed young, living alone in a modest apartment and working long hours just to survive. But despite the hardships etched into every line of her weathered face, her heart had remained tender. As she looked out through the window, she noticed a boy in a wheelchair sitting alone outside, shivering under the relentless rain. His frail body was wrapped in a damp, tattered blanket, and his wide eyes reflected fear and loneliness. Without hesitation, Ruth dropped a rag and rushed into the storm. She gently approached the boy, her voice soft with concern. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked. The boy, Noah Whitman, looked up at her with weary blue eyes and whispered, "My dad told me to wait here. He said he'd be back." Ruth's heart broke. No child should be abandoned in the cold, especially one so vulnerable. She guided Noah into the diner, wrapped a towel around his shoulders, and served him hot soup and toast, simple comforts that meant everything in that moment. What Ruth didn't know was that across the street, a man watched from the shadows of a luxury car. That man was Gregory Whitman, Noah's biological father, and a powerful corporate figure. He had left his son alone, believing hardship would toughen him. But as he watched Ruth's selfless act of compassion, something shifted within him. That single moment, one woman's choice to show kindness when no one else would ignite a chain of events that would alter not just her life, but the lives of everyone involved. As Ruth Carter tended to young Noah Whitman inside the warm diner, gently wiping raindrops from his face and encouraging him to eat, a storm far colder than the one outside began to stir. The quiet act of kindness she had extended to a shivering child was about to be twisted into something ugly. Marilyn Prescott, a well-dressed, sharp-tongued diner regular, and a woman of status and entitlement, entered the scene. With a look of disdain, she locked eyes on Ruth and the boy and immediately assumed the worst. "What do you think you're doing with that child?" She snapped, her voice slicing through the calm like a blade. Ruth, startled but composed, replied, "He was outside in the rain alone. I'm just helping." But Marilyn's smirk deepened. "Helping or kidnapping?" she sneered before pulling out her phone and calling the police. "Yes, I'd like to report a child abduction." "The suspect is an elderly black woman," she said coldly, making sure everyone in the diner heard. In an instant, suspicion flooded the room. A few customers stopped sipping their coffee and began whispering. The warmth that Ruth had created for Noah was swallowed by icy judgment. She stood frozen, the weight of the moment heavy on her thin shoulders, her heart pounded. Not out of guilt, but from the sting of being so quickly and cruelly misjudged. This wasn't just about Noah anymore. It was about who she was, what she looked like, and how society chose to see her. Noah, sensing the fear and confusion, gripped Ruth's hand tightly. "Don't let them take me," he whispered, his small voice breaking through the hostility. But Ruth stood her ground, her voice calm yet firm. "I've done nothing wrong. Compassion isn't a crime." Across the street, Gregory Whitman continued to observe from his car. He watched as the woman who had shown his son more warmth than he ever had became the target of false accusations based not on her actions, but on her appearance and status. It was a moment that revealed more than just prejudice. It exposed the deep cracks in a society quick to fear what it refuses to understand. For Ruth, the night became more than a quiet act of humanity. It became a silent battle against the injustice that had followed her all her life. From the sleek black car parked discreetly across the street, Gregory Whitman sat watching the diner in silence, his sharp eyes never leaving the image of Ruth Carter comforting his son. As the CEO of Whitman Holdings, a powerful high-stakes conglomerate, Gregory was a man who believed in control strategy and calculated moves. Kindness to him was either weakness or currency. Watching Ruth wrap a towel around Noah and offer him food not only surprised him, it intrigued him. In his world, people didn't do anything without expecting something in return. "What does this woman want?" he muttered. "Why would someone with nothing risk herself to care for a boy who wasn't her responsibility?" His mind quickly turned to optics, PR damage and opportunity. He didn't yet see Ruth as a person, only a potential pawn. Later that evening, after finding out her name and address through his assistant, Nina Delgado, Gregory arrived unannounced at Ruth's modest apartment. Dressed in a long, dark coat, he exuded quiet authority as he stood at her doorstep. Ruth, surprised and wary, let him in. She recognized him instantly. Noah's father. "Good evening, Miss Carter." "We need to talk," he said coolly. As they sat across from each other, the warmth of her humble home contrasted sharply with his cold, clinical demeanor. Gregory got straight to the point. "Whitman Holdings is facing backlash due to recent scandals. Your actions at the diner have caught the public's attention. People are calling you a hero. I'd like to offer you a position at my company. A simple job, good pay. All you need to do is be seen, be the face of our social responsibility campaign." Ruth stared at him, her heart sinking. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't even respect. It was manipulation. "I helped your son because it was the right thing to do," she said softly, not for show, not for money. But Gregory had already decided. In his eyes, her poverty meant she had no choice. "You have nothing to lose, Ms. Carter," he said, glancing around at her modest belongings. "This is an opportunity people like you don't get often." Though her instincts screamed caution, Ruth thought of Noah, of the boy left alone in the rain of his fragile smile when he found warmth. She agreed, but not for Gregory, not for his company. She did it for the child who still needed protection from a world that had already failed him too many times. As Gregory left her apartment, a faint smirk formed on his lips. He believed he had gained control of another piece on his corporate chessboard. But what he failed to see was that Ruth Carter wasn't just another pawn. She was about to become the one force he couldn't predict, manipulate, or defeat. The game had begun. Ruth Carter walked through the polished marble halls of Whitman Holdings with quiet dignity, mop in hand. Her presence as out of place in the glass-walled skyscraper as a wildflower in a concrete lot. It was her first week in the company, and the icy stares and whispered gossip that trailed behind her made it clear she wasn't welcome. Senior staff in sharp suits passed her without acknowledgement, some with narrowed eyes, others with veiled contempt. To them she was a token, a PR stunt dressed in overalls, not someone worthy of their respect. Yet Ruth moved with a calm strength, her posture unbending, her eyes focused. She hadn't come here for their approval. She was here for Noah, the boy she had once pulled from the cold, whose silent pain she could never forget. She murmured to herself as she walked, "This isn't about me. It never was. It's for him." The most venomous hostility came from Marilyn Prescott, the same woman who had once accused Ruth of kidnapping. Now elevated as a high-ranking executive within the company, Marilyn made it her mission to remind Ruth of her place. How touching, she sneered one morning as Ruth quietly cleaned the executive hallway. "The diner janitor is now scrubbing our floors. I suppose they call this community outreach." Laughter rippled among the watching employees, the air thick with humiliation. Ruth looked up, meeting Marilyn's eyes, not with bitterness, but with unwavering calm. "I'm here to do my job, Mrs. Prescott," she said, her voice steady as stone. "You can mock me if you wish, but I'm not ashamed of honest work." The hallway went silent, even. Marilyn blinked. There was something in Ruth's voice that couldn't be shaken. A quiet thunder, but the cruelty didn't stop. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Accusations of being a corporate spy, a charity case, an emotional liability. Even her sincerity was twisted into suspicion. Yet Ruth endured. She never let the shame they tried to place on her take root. Every day she reminded herself this wasn't about proving herself to them. It was about staying true to who she was. She cleaned each floor with the same care she had shown Noah because she believed in the quiet power of integrity. Even in a world ruled by power and profit, she carried herself with the grace of someone who knew her worth, someone who had nothing to hide and everything to protect. But deep down, Ruth also knew this wasn't just a battle for her dignity. It was a battle for Noah's future. If she gave up, the world around him would remain heartless and cruel, so she stayed. She endured. Because she believed that sometimes the smallest acts of resilience in the face of cruelty are what plant the seeds for real lasting change. And though they saw her as a weak old woman with no voice, they had no idea that Ruth Carter was about to become the conscience their corporation never saw coming. One quiet weekend afternoon, when the executive floor of Whitman Holdings stood empty and silent, Ruth Carter was assigned to clean the CEO's office. As she moved through the spacious room, carefully tending to the spotless surfaces, her eyes unintentionally caught a black folder left slightly open on Gregory Whitman's desk. It was filled with financial reports and charts. Nothing she fully understood, but one detail stood out: a downsizing plan affecting over 3,000 employees. Her heart sank. These weren't just numbers. They were families, lives, and futures. Ruth whispered to herself, "No, no, not again. Not after all this." She had known what it meant to live paycheck to paycheck. She had seen firsthand how losing a job could destroy someone's stability. The idea that thousands of people would be discarded like broken tools in the name of efficiency filled her with a deep and burning unease. Later that evening, as she quietly passed an office door left ajar, she overheard a conversation between Gregory and his assistant, Nina Delgado. "We'll begin the layoffs next Monday," Nina stated coolly, her tone businesslike, even casual. "Mostly from production and support staff. It'll boost investor confidence and push the stock value up." Gregory's voice followed calm and detached. "Good. They've served their purpose." Ruth's hands clenched at her sides. These were people, not chess pieces. She couldn't stay silent. She stepped into Gregory's office, unannounced, her figure framed in the doorway, like a storm cloud rolling in. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "do you really believe cutting thousands of jobs for stock gains is the right thing to do?" Gregory turned, caught off guard. "Miss Carter," he said, his composure slipping for a split second. "This is a business decision. It's not personal." Ruth took a slow step forward. Her eyes didn't waver. "It's personal to every single person you're about to put out on the street," she said firmly. "You may not know their names, but they will remember yours. You talk about strategy, but where's your humanity?" Gregory blinked, stunned. The weight of her words seemed to freeze the air in the room. Even Nina stood still, her tablet in hand, unsure what to say. Ruth's voice rose not in anger, but in truth. "I may not wear a suit or have a fancy title, but I know what it means to fight to survive. I know what it means to lose everything because someone like you made a decision without ever looking into a person's eyes." Her words hung heavy in the air, defying the cold steel of corporate indifference. And in that silence, for the first time, even Gregory Whitman, the man who thought kindness was weakness, stood without reply. In that moment, Ruth wasn't just a janitor. She wasn't a symbol. She was a force of conscience. She wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. She was cleaning the dust off a soul that hadn't been touched in decades. The boardroom of Whitman Holdings had never felt heavier. Lined with sleek glass walls and filled with powerful executives, it was a place where decisions were made behind closed doors, often without a second thought for the lives affected beyond them. But today, something unusual broke the pattern. Ruth Carter, a former cleaning lady with no title, no wealth, and no power, stepped into the room at Gregory Whitman's invitation. The very people who had once looked through her now stared at her with thinly veiled confusion and contempt. A whisper buzzed through the room. "Why is she here? I invited her," Gregory said coolly, silencing the room. "Let's hear her out." Ruth stood at the head of the table, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes clear with purpose. The fluorescent lights above seemed almost too harsh, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not here as an executive." She began, her voice steady, deliberate. "I'm here on behalf of the thousands of workers who've been forgotten. People who've given their strength and loyalty to this company and now fear they're nothing more than a line in your expense reports." There was a shuffle in the room, a few uneasy glances. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that demanded attention. "You speak of profits and market shares. But when did we start measuring a person's value by how replaceable they are?" From the end of the table, Marilyn Prescott crossed her arms, lips curling into a smirk. "With all due respect, Ms. Carter," she said icily, "what do you know about corporate survival?" Ruth turned to her unbothered. Her gaze didn't waver. "I know what it's like to survive, to choose between food and rent, to work 2 jobs and still go to bed hungry, to be unseen. And I know that a company without compassion is just a machine that devours its own people." The room fell silent. Her words didn't need polish. They were raw, real, and undeniable. One by one, the board members lowered their eyes, confronted by a truth they had long ignored. Even Gregory sat quietly, hands clasped before him, mind spinning with the realization that this woman, once dismissed as insignificant, had voiced what no one else dared to say. Ruth didn't bring charts, spreadsheets, or strategic memos. She brought something more powerful: truth. And for the first time in that cold, powerful room, the workers had a voice, and it belonged to Ruth Carter. The morning after her impassioned speech to the board of Whitman Holdings, she quietly walked into Gregory Whitman's office. Her resignation letter held firmly in her calloused hand. The same hand that had once mopped floors now trembled not from fear, but from the gravity of what she was about to leave behind. Gregory looked up from his desk, a flicker of surprise breaking through his usually composed expression. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you don't have to do this. Your voice matters here now." Ruth gave him a long, measured look. "Mr. Whitman," she began, her tone calm but resolute, "I didn't come here to matter. I came here to help, and I've done what I can." She stepped forward and placed the envelope on his desk with a gentle, decisive motion. "But I can't keep working for a company where profit is more sacred than people." She said, her voice quiet yet unshakable. Gregory sat in silence as her words sank in. His empire, once fueled by calculated control and flawless optics, suddenly felt unstable beneath her truth. He had built it brick by brick with power, not purpose. "You'll be taken care of," he offered quietly. "Severance benefits. Whatever you need." But Ruth shook her head slowly. "I don't need anything from this place but peace and a clean conscience." There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. She turned and walked toward the door. As she reached the threshold, she paused and added, "Noah deserved more than numbers and strategy, so did everyone else in this building." Within hours, word of Ruth Carter's resignation began to spread. At first, just whispers among employees who had come to respect her strength. But then the media picked it up. Headlines blared, "Former janitor resigns from Whitman Holdings after speaking out against layoffs." Her story hit a nerve across the city. Ruth became more than a woman who stood up to injustice. She became a symbol of what compassion looked like in a world gone cold. People who had never met her felt seen in her voice. Workers across industries began sharing their own stories of being discarded, overlooked, and undervalued. Whitman Holdings, once the image of untouchable power, now found itself in the middle of a PR storm. The company that had once hired Ruth as a marketing token now had to face the truth she left behind. And Ruth. She returned to her quiet apartment. No spotlight, no press release, just peace. She had no idea what would come next, but for the first time in years, she felt free. Not just from a job, but from the silence that so often traps people like her. She had stood up, she had been heard, and now, a city was listening. Just days after her quiet resignation from Whitman Holdings, Ruth Carter received an unexpected phone call that would change the course of her life once again. The voice on the other end was calm, respectful, and deliberate. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carter. This is Daniel Pierce, CEO of Orion Group. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Ruth blinked, holding the phone a little tighter. She had heard of Daniel Pierce, a forward-thinking leader known for his integrity and commitment to ethical business practices and community investment. But she'd never imagined someone like him would call her. "I've been following your story," he continued. "And I believe the courage you've shown is exactly what our city and our company needs right now." There was a pause. Ruth's heart thudded gently in her chest. "I'm listening," she said softly. Daniel's voice warmed. "We'd like to offer you a role. Something unique. Something real. I want you to help us lead a new social impact program, one aimed at protecting low-income workers, advocating for fair treatment, and rebuilding the lives that corporations like Whitman Holdings have too often overlooked." Ruth opened her mouth to speak but couldn't. Her throat tightened. She looked around her modest living room at the second-hand furniture, the worn rug, and a photo of her late husband smiling from a shelf. But Daniel wasn't done. "We want the initiative to bear your name," he added. "We're calling it the Carter Community Foundation, in honor of your late husband and your lifelong legacy of quiet service." Tears welled up in Ruth's eyes. She lowered herself slowly onto her couch, hands trembling. Not from age, but from awe. You'd name it after me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Not just after you," Daniel replied, "because of you." Though overwhelmed, Ruth accepted, not out of ambition, not for the spotlight, but for purpose, for the people, for the children, for the workers, for every silent voice she had once stood among. Within weeks, the foundation launched in a repurposed factory building in the heart of the city. What had once symbolized industrial decline was now alive with hope. The Carter Community Foundation quickly became a hub for change-offering vocational training, educational support, mental health counseling, and emergency assistance to struggling families. But more than that, it became a place where dignity was restored, where compassion wasn't a slogan, but a daily practice. Ruth, though humbled by the spotlight, led with grace. She remained the first to arrive and the last to leave, often sitting with visitors one-on-one, listening to their stories with the same warmth she had once shown to little Noah in that diner so many months before. This wasn't just a program, it was a movement, and Ruth Carter had become its heart. A living reminder that real change doesn't begin in boardrooms. It begins in moments of courage, in acts of kindness, and in the refusal to stay silent. The impact of Ruth Carter's actions rippled far beyond the walls of the Carter Community Foundation. What began as a single act of kindness in a rain-soaked diner had transformed into a movement that swept through the city with powerful momentum. Her unwavering stance against greed, her public resignation from Whitman Holdings, and her partnership with Daniel Pierce and Orion Group quickly made headlines not just as a human interest story, but as a symbol of a deeper shift. For the first time in years, public discourse began to center not on profit margins, but on People articles poured in, praising Ruth as the moral compass the corporate world desperately needed. News anchors called her a modern-day conscience, while op-eds asked, "What would Ruth Carter do?" Social media exploded with support. Hashtags like "Be Like Ruth" and "Compassion" first trended across platforms. Workers in other companies began to speak out against unfair practices, drawing strength from Ruth's courage. Families who had once been silent victims of layoffs, mistreatment, and systemic neglect now felt seen, heard, and empowered. The Carter Community Foundation became more than a charity. It became a haven, a place where struggling individuals found opportunity. Children found hope and workers found their voice. As businesses across the city watched Orion Group thrive while championing ethics and humanity, the pressure mounted on corporations like Whitman Holdings to rethink their values. Even those who once dismissed Ruth began to reflect in silence. Her story reminded them of something the world had nearly forgotten, that one person armed with compassion and conviction could ignite real and lasting change. Ruth hadn't set out to start a revolution, but her kindness had become contagious, inspiring a city to rediscover a simple truth: people matter more than profit. And from every corner of the community, voices rose not in protest, but in solidarity with the woman who taught them that courage, dignity, and love still had a place in the modern world. One quiet afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the windows of the Carter Community Foundation, Ruth Carter looked up from a stack of applications to find a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Noah Whitman, taller now, older, with a quiet strength in his eyes that hadn't been there the night they met Mrs. Carter. He said softly, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "It's me." Ruth's eyes filled with warmth. She rose slowly and stepped forward, arms gently outstretched. She embraced him without hesitation, as if welcoming home a part of her soul. "My goodness, Noah, look at you," she whispered into his shoulder. They sat together in her small office, sunlight warming the space between them. Noah began to speak, not just about his life, but about the emptiness that still lingered between him and his father, Gregory Whitman. "He's trying," Noah admitted, eyes cast downward. "But he's still so distant. I don't think he knows how to feel, or even how to face what he's done." Then he looked directly at Ruth, vulnerability flickering in his voice. "But he listens to you. You changed him once. Maybe you could help him see what he's still missing." Ruth placed a hand gently over his. She knew that pain, the longing for connection, the ache of a heart left unanswered. And she also knew the danger of letting wounds fester in silence. That night she made the call, not as a leader, not as a public figure, but as a woman who understood that the hardest conversations are often the ones that heal us the most. Gregory Whitman agreed to meet her, this time not in a boardroom, but in a quiet corner cafe. Gregory Whitman agreed to meet Ruth Carter, not in a glass-walled office, but in a small, tucked-away corner cafe that smelled of cinnamon and quiet reflection. He arrived before her, seated at a window table with a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. When Ruth entered, he stood. His posture wasn't the powerful stance of a CEO, but that of a man unsure of himself. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice lower than she'd ever heard it. Ruth nodded and sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the world moved with casual indifference, but inside that cafe, something delicate and rare was unfolding. Gregory finally broke the silence. "I failed him," he said, his fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. "I left Noah alone. More than once. Not just in the rain, but in life." Ruth listened, her face calm, her heart open. She didn't rush to speak. She let the truth settle. "I thought I was making him strong," Gregory continued. "But I see now I was just afraid. Afraid of vulnerability. afraid of being seen. His voice cracked slightly. And then someone I underestimated came along and gave him what I couldn't comfort safety. Love. Ruth placed her hand on the table, not touching his, but close. It's never too late to be the father he needs, she said softly. But you have to mean it. You have to show up, not with your money, but with your heart. Gregory looked at her, and for the first time, the steel in his gaze faded. What remained was raw, human, and real. He nodded. I don't know if I can fix everything, he whispered. You won't, Ruth replied, but you can start by not running anymore. And with those words, something in him shifted. It wasn't absolution. It was permission to begin again. That spring, the sun poured over the university campus on the day of Noah Whitman's graduation, casting everything in a golden glow. Students in navy blue gowns lined up with wide smiles and proud hearts. Family members filled the bleachers' cameras, ready, emotions high. But amid the cheers and camera flashes, all eyes turned when Gregory Whitman, one of the city's most powerful and formerly feared business leaders, rose from his seat and quietly walked toward the stage. His polished shoes echoed across the floor as he approached his son, who had just been called to receive his diploma. Noah stiffened, slightly surprised. Then Gregory placed a steady hand on his shoulder, turned to the microphone, and took a deep breath. The auditorium fell silent. I am Gregory Whitman. He began, his voice steady yet laced with humility. And today, I stand before you, not as a CEO, but as a father who has made many mistakes. The audience held its breath. For years, I believed power meant distance, that strength came from silence. I taught my son to be tough by hiding tenderness. And I was wrong. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found her, Ruth Carter. He continued, voice cracking. Slightly showed my son the compassion I never could. She reminded me that success means nothing if you lose your soul on the way there. In the back row, Ruth sat quietly, her hand pressed gently over her heart. Applause thundered through the hall. Some stood. Others wiped away tears. Noah turned to his father, emotion flooding his face, and for the first time they embraced. Not as strangers, caught between silence and expectation, but as father and son beginning again. Ruth sat still, heart full, her eyes glistening. She hadn't done it for applause, she'd done it for Noah. And in that moment, she realized her quiet strength had sparked something far greater. A reconciliation born not from power, but from love, humility, and the courage to change. In the years that followed, the Carter Community Foundation blossomed into something far greater than Ruth Carter had ever imagined. What started as a modest program to support struggling workers and families became a vibrant beacon of hope across the city. Children once denied access to education now studied under its roof. Parents found new careers through free vocational training. Those who had once felt invisible in society found purpose, support, and dignity within the walls Ruth had helped build. But she never sought recognition. Ruth became a symbol not of fame or success, but of quiet resilience. A living reminder that one person's courage and compassion could move mountains. As her hair turned fully silver and her steps began to slow, Ruth gradually stepped back from daily operations. The foundation she built was no longer just hers. It belonged to the people, and she knew exactly who should carry it forward. She called Noah to her office one morning as spring flowers bloomed outside the window. The same boy she had once pulled from a cold rain now stood before her, a man, thoughtful and strong. Noah, she said, smiling gently. It's time. He blinked. Time for what Ruth reached into her drawer and pulled out a small worn envelope, her original mission statement for the foundation. I built this place out of love, out of fire, out of truth. But now, it needs new hands. Hands that understand what it means to hurt and to heal. Noah's voice cracked. "You're not leaving, are you?" "I'm not leaving you," she said, reaching out to hold his hand. "I'm just stepping aside. So you can rise." From that day on, Noah Whitman became the new heart of the foundation. He led with the same integrity Ruth had shown him years ago. He often called her Grandma Ruth in public, a name that stuck. Loved by the community as much as by him. Ruth spent her final days in a small room overlooking the community garden, a space once barren that now bloomed with flowers, vegetables, and laughter. From her window, she could see children learning, neighbors gathering, and families healing. Every morning, she would whisper, "Let it grow." Noah visited often, sitting beside her, sometimes in silence, sometimes with stories of new programs and lives transformed. One day, with tears brimming in his eyes, he promised, "Your legacy will never fade." "I swear it," Ruth nodded, resting her hand over his. "Just make sure you lead with love. Child, always love." When Ruth Carter passed, the city mourned, not with sorrow but with reverence. Thousands came to pay their respects, not because she was famous, but because she had given them hope. Murals were painted. Scholarships were named in her honor. And the foundation continued to grow, rooted in the values she had lived by every single day: compassion, courage, justice. In the end, Ruth Carter's legacy wasn't carved in stone, it was carved in hearts, and in those hearts she would live forever. Proof that love, no matter how quiet, can truly change the world.